My name is Madison Carter, and that night, just as I pulled my suitcase out of the taxi, I saw all my belongings crammed into cardboard boxes, dumped under the cold rain outside the front gate. My mother stood on the porch, my two older brothers flanking her like guards, their eyes showing not a trace of sympathy. Have you ever come home with joy in your heart, ready to share it, only to have your own family slam the door in your face? They told me the house had been sold, and I no longer had a place to live. If you've ever experienced the moment your family cast you out like a stranger, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so you can follow me through this entire journey, because that night was only the beginning of a truth far more brutal. I stood still in the rain, my hand gripping the suitcase handle, my heart both numb and tangled. The icy water ran down the back of my neck, soaking the thin coat I had worn from the airport. But what chilled me more was my mother's gaze. The same eyes I once sought for warmth, now only cold and unfamiliar. Memories rushed back like fragments of an old film. I remembered exactly how I grew up in this house. Every corner of the kitchen, every window, and my father's laughter before he left us forever. I was 13 then, doing homework in my room when the phone rang. Just minutes later, my mother collapsed into a chair, tears falling though her lips stayed pressed tight. My father had died in a work accident at the lumber mill, the place he had devoted his entire life to in order to support this family. After the funeral, everything changed. My gentle, smiling mother became closed off and controlling. Ethan, the oldest at 21, had his architecture degree fully funded by her. Mark, at 19, had all expenses paid for his firefighter training. As for me, my mother said, "You're still young, just focus on studying." But every extra class, every personal dream had to be carefully considered because not everything is worth investing in. I had always been good at art and design, but when I told her I wanted to study interior design, she shook her head. "That job isn't stable. You should choose something secure like accounting or nursing." I stayed silent. After so many arguments, I knew that in this house, my choices only mattered if they matched hers. I learned to fend for myself. In college, I earned a partial scholarship, worked part-time at the library and a coffee shop to cover rent and books. Ethan and Mark each had full financial support: tuition, housing, even spending money. I told myself I wasn't jealous. At least that's what I tried to believe. But deep down, every time I saw them living comfortably in the life my mother planned, while I counted every dollar, it left a scratch inside me that never healed. By graduation, I owed the bank a considerable sum. My mother called and said, "Come home. You won't have to pay rent here. I'll just charge you a reasonable amount." I thought it would be a way to save money and also spend more time with family. I moved back into my old room upstairs, telling myself it was only temporary, until I paid off my debt and could move out. Reality wasn't that simple. The reasonable amount my mother mentioned was higher than I expected, and it came with unspoken conditions. I had to do most of the housework: laundry, cooking, cleaning, driving her to appointments, fixing the printer, changing light bulbs. Sometimes she asked me to prepare materials for Ethan or babysit Mark's kids when he was on duty. I did it all, thinking it was a way to repay her for raising me. But at dinner, the comparisons still came steadily. When Ethan was your age, he already had his own company. Mark bought a house at 28. When will you finally settle down, Madison? I didn't want to argue, but sometimes I couldn't hold back. Once I said, "Mom, I'm an interior designer. I'm moving up in my field. It's just a different path than Ethan or Mark." She just shrugged. "Whatever path you take, it needs to produce results. At your age, if you can't fully support yourself, you're still just relying on others." I knew my mother measured success by a strict yardstick, and in her eyes, I was always a few rungs below my brothers. But I still hoped that if I achieved something big, she would finally see my value. One summer evening last year, I walked past the living room and saw my mother and Ethan speaking quietly. I was heading in to get a glass of water, but they fell silent when they saw me. All I caught was a fragment. Split the house early before she claims her inheritance. I froze, but forced a smile and walked on as if I'd heard nothing. Inside, worry crept in. I told myself I'd misheard, or if I hadn't, it was something far off in the future. But small signs began to appear. My mother asked if I'd been saving much lately. Ethan suggested I think about moving out soon to be independent. Mark hinted that the house was too big for 3 people and could be rented or sold. I felt uneasy but pushed it aside, busy with new projects and unwilling to believe my family would push me out of my own home. On nights when I sat at my desk, watching the living room light through the crack in my door, hearing the TV playing while my mother sat alone, I sometimes wanted to go down, sit beside her like I used to, and talk about work, friends, and the design ideas I was pursuing. But I remembered how she would brush off my stories, as if they were trivial, and I stayed put. Once I asked, "If I landed a big project one day, would you be proud of me, Mom?" She smiled but didn't meet my eyes. "Do something truly solid, and I'll tell everyone you've succeeded." I stayed silent. Solid, in her definition, would never be what I was doing. When I got the news that my company had won the bid for a boutique hotel chain in Seattle, it felt like a lifeline. This was not just a career milestone. It was my chance to prove to my mother I wasn't a failure. I was appointed lead designer, in charge of the entire concept and execution. Before the trip, I bought gifts for everyone. A turquoise silk scarf for my mother, her favorite color. An architectural drawing kit for Ethan. And high-end firefighter gloves for Mark. I hoped this time when I returned, I would see pride in their faces. But at dinner the night before I left, my mother only said, "Make sure you're back in time for the family meeting." No good luck, no questions about the work. Ethan and Mark chatted about their own topics, while I ate in silence. I had no idea that during my days in Seattle, things at home were already shifting in ways I couldn't imagine. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, share it so I know I'm not alone. I'll tell the rest, but even now, the memory of that time sends a shiver through me. I once believed blood ties would shield me from the harshest blows, but I was wrong. The Seattle trip began on a chilly March morning. I sat by the airplane window, clutching the thick portfolio containing all my design concepts for the boutique hotel project. Every drawing, every rendering had been revised dozens of times. This wasn't just a job. It was proof of the years I had stayed true to my path, despite my mother's and brother's doubts. The first presentation took place in a high-rise conference room overlooking the Seattle waterfront. Morning light streamed through the tall glass windows, reflecting off the hotel model my team and I had prepared. When I spoke about bringing the nature of the Pacific Northwest into every interior detail, the client's eyes lit up. They nodded, took notes, and when the meeting ended, the project lead shook my hand firmly. "We're very impressed. Just a few small adjustments, and we can sign the contract." I walked out of the conference room feeling light, as if all the pressure from the past few weeks had finally lifted. That evening, the company's director invited my team and me out for dinner to celebrate. He didn't hold back on the compliments. "You have an exceptional eye for design and a rare ability to communicate your ideas," he told me. "If this project goes smoothly, I'd like to discuss a higher position for you." I smiled and replied softly, "Thank you, I truly appreciate this opportunity." Inside, my thoughts went straight to Mom. I pictured the moment I'd return home, placing a teal silk scarf in her hands and telling her that her daughter had just helped the company land its biggest contract of the year. Maybe this time she would say, "I'm proud of you." But when I got back to the hotel and opened my laptop to check my personal email, one subject line made me freeze. "Notice of joint account activity, Northwest Trust Bank." I couldn't recall contacting the bank recently, so I opened it out of curiosity. The email stated that the inheritance account Dad had left for the 3 of us, an account that had barely been touched since his passing, had just been nearly emptied, leaving only a symbolic small amount. I read it over and over, my heartbeat quickening. This account was set up as a joint ownership, requiring all signatures for any transaction. I had never signed anything. I texted Mom immediately. "Mom, Dad's account was just almost emptied. Do you know about this?" A few minutes later she replied, "This doesn't concern you." I sat frozen at the screen. Doesn't concern me. That was Dad's money, and part of it was mine. I wanted to call her right away, but logic told me that in the middle of an important business trip, I couldn't let emotions derail my work. I saved the email, forwarded all the details to my personal backup, and told myself I'd investigate once I got home. For the rest of my days in Seattle, I worked like a machine. Meetings during the day, revising drawings at night to match the client's new requests. I still bought gifts for Mom and my 2 brothers as planned, but a heavy weight sat in my chest. I began recalling odd conversations before my trip. Mark's vague comment, Ethan's averted gaze when I mentioned home renovations, and the way Mom had recently been locking the file cabinet in her room. On my final night before returning to Portland, I called Ethan. "I heard Dad's account was almost emptied. What's going on?" He paused for a few seconds, then said, "Mom's handling it. You don't need to get involved. But I'm a joint owner. I have a right to know. Madison, don't make things complicated. We'll talk when you're back." That answer only deepened my unease. I tried calling Mark, but his phone went to voicemail. I sent him a text, but no reply. The next morning on the flight home, I sat still, watching the clouds drift past the window, trying to piece together scattered clues. What could possibly make Mom and my brothers agree to hide something from me? And why now, while I was away? When the plane landed in Portland, I received a single text from Mom. "Be on time for the family meeting Saturday." No mention of my email, no asking how my trip went. I took a taxi home, rolling my suitcase onto the porch. The house looked the same, but the air inside felt different. Mom was at the kitchen table, Ethan and Mark standing nearby, all 3 silent, watching me as if they'd been waiting. I forced a smile. "I'm home. I brought gifts for everyone." No one responded. Mom simply said, "We'll talk Saturday. I'm busy now." Upstairs, a strange chill hung in the air despite the heater running. On my desk, some folders were out of order, as if someone had gone through them. In my closet, a few small boxes with personal documents had been moved. Something was being set in motion. That night, while I was reviewing project files, Mark knocked on my door. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Yes, come in." He leaned against the doorframe, avoiding my eyes. "You should be prepared. Saturday might not be pleasant." "For what reason?" "Mom's decided. You'll understand then." He left before I could ask more. I sat there, gripping my pencil tightly. Since Dad's death, I'd grown used to being left out of major family decisions. But this time felt far more serious. For the rest of the week, I buried myself in work to avoid thinking about the cryptic looks and half-answers. I completed the final part of my project and received positive feedback from the client. The director sent an email praising me and mentioning the upcoming discussion about a higher position. Those words should have made me happy, but my mind stayed fixed on my parents' house, the emptied bank account, and the looming family meeting. Friday, I decided to come home earlier than planned, hoping to speak to Mom privately before everyone gathered. But as the taxi turned onto my familiar street, the sight in front of me made my stomach drop. Cardboard boxes stacked neatly by the gate, sealed with tape, my name written in black marker on the lids. A light spring drizzle was soaking the labels. I didn't need anyone to explain what was happening. And I had a feeling the answer to that bank email was hidden somewhere among those damp boxes. Before I could get out of the car, Mom opened the door with Ethan and Mark stepping out behind her. Each wore a different expression, but all carried the same look, the kind that said the decision had been made long ago, and I was only now being informed. If you've ever known the feeling of realizing you're about to lose something that's been part of your life forever, you'd understand how my heart felt like it was being crushed in that moment. And I didn't yet know this was only the beginning of something far worse. The rain kept falling lightly as I opened the taxi door and stepped onto the damp stone path. The sound of the wheels rolling away faded, leaving an almost suffocating silence in the front yard. The taped boxes, each marked in Mom's familiar handwriting, sat like final punctuation marks. A cold breeze brushed past me, but it wasn't as chilling as the way Mom looked at me, not as a mother, but as someone firmly cutting off a burden. I took a deep breath and walked closer to the steps. "Mom, what is this?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the rain and the lump in my throat. She folded her arms across her chest, standing tall, my brothers like shadows flanking her sides. "This is clear enough. You can't stay here anymore. The house has been sold." I looked from her cold face to Ethan and then Mark, searching for a flicker of sympathy, but found none. "Sold? When? Why didn't anyone tell me?" I struggled to keep my voice even. Ethan shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "You've stayed here long enough, Madison. It's time for you to be independent. I've paid rent, done chores, taken care of everyone. And you call that dependent?" I gripped my bag strapped tightly. Mark cut in, his voice tinged with impatience. "We all have to grow up. We moved out when we were 23. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. Mom agreed to put her name on the lease, front the deposit, handle everything. "And what about you?" Mom cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. "Don't blame the circumstances. You've had 3 years to prepare, but you did nothing to move out." "Prepare? You never said anything clearly. Just dropped hints and expected me to figure it out." I could feel the heat rising in my face. "Do you think that's fair?" I turned to Ethan. "You know I just helped the company land the biggest contract of the year. Why choose now to do this?" Ethan shook his head. "Your job has nothing to do with it. This is Mom's decision." I looked up at my mother, searching her eyes for an honest explanation. "Did you sell the house to help Ethan pay off his debts?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Her eyes flickered for a moment, but she quickly regained composure. "What I did was for the good of the whole family." I gave a bitter laugh. "Family? Meaning everyone except me." Silence stretched between us. Rain pattered on the porch roof. Car drove past. Our neighbor walked his dog by, glancing at us before pretending to adjust the leash. I could see curiosity and pity in his eyes. Swallowing hard, I lowered my voice. "Fine. But at least let me inside to get the things I need." Mom shook her head. "Your things are already packed. There's no need to go in." "You think you know what's important to me?" I asked, pointing at the soggy boxes in the rain. Ethan stepped down from the porch, his voice low, almost like a warning. "Don't make a scene. This is the final decision." "Final decision." I stressed each word. "So the 3 of you discussed it and decided my life while I wasn't here to defend myself." Mark avoided my gaze but finally spoke. "Mom talked to a lawyer. She doesn't need your signature to sell the house." Froze. "You don't need my signature? Dad left this house to all 3 of us. My name is on the paperwork." Mom's voice was disturbingly calm. "That's been taken care of." My heart pounded. I understood what she meant. She might have forged my signature or found a way to make the sale legal without my consent. "What did you do?" I asked slowly. She turned away, saying nothing. I knew I wasn't getting answers today. Not here, not under the neighbor's watchful eye, in the rain, with my belongings soaking through. I turned, grabbed the largest, heaviest box. "Mom, Ethan, Mark." I stopped and looked at them one more time. You just slammed shut the last door between us. No one replied. Mom simply walked inside and shut the door. The sound of the lock turning was cold and final. I dragged the box to the curb, my hands freezing. Only one thought echoed in my mind. I will find out the truth, and this time I will not stay silent. If you've ever discovered a family member quietly stripping you of your legal rights, you'll understand exactly how I felt. Leave a comment and share, because I believe stories like this need to be told so no one suffers in silence. I opened the trunk of my car and loaded the box. The drenched suitcase went in the back seat. Sitting behind the wheel, my hands trembled, but my eyes were dry. I'd cried enough in my life over injustices from my own family. This time I'd face it with a clear head. The car rolled away from the familiar street. Every house, every tree along the way held a memory. A winter dinner with the family around the fireplace, summer mornings when Dad took me for pancakes, Mom's voice calling up the stairs while I was still asleep. All of it was now covered in the cold dust of betrayal. I didn't know what lay ahead. But one thing was certain. I would not let this go as if it had never happened. I would track down every document, every piece of evidence, and reclaim what was mine. Not just for the monetary value, but for the truth and the dignity they had tried to erase from my life. I drove straight to Chloe's apartment, my closest colleague and the one person in the company I trusted most. She lived with her boyfriend in a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of an old but tidy building in downtown Portland. When I texted, "Chloe, I need to talk." "Urgently," she replied instantly. "Come over." No need to explain. Dragging my suitcase and rain-soaked boxes into the hallway, Chloe opened the door, eyes wide. "Oh my God, Madison, what happened?" I forced a smile, my voice hoarse. "My mom kicked me out." The sentence broke halfway. My throat tightened, and everything I'd been holding in since the front yard came spilling out the moment I stepped into the safety of her home. Chloe pulled me inside, and Tyler, her boyfriend, quickly carried the boxes into the living room. "Sit down," Chloe said, handing me a towel. "Start from the beginning." I told them, from arriving home earlier than expected and finding my things outside, to the cold exchange with my mother and brothers. I mentioned the email from the Seattle bank and the growing sense that I'd been kept in the dark. Tyler shook his head. "This isn't just being kicked out. This is stripping away your legal rights." "I know," I said, wiping my eyes. "And I need to prove it." That night, once everything calmed down, I began sorting through the paperwork I'd brought. In the jumble of envelopes, I found a pale yellow one, the top corner printed with the name of a law office in Salem. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a letter dated 6 months ago, sent to my mom's address, but the envelope had no sign of being opened. The letter detailed an investment my father had made in a home goods lumber company in Oregon. The company had recently sold a large portion of its assets, and profits were to be distributed to shareholders, including the estate of Robert Carter, meaning my father's estate. The funds were to be deposited into a joint account shared by the 3 legal heirs, per the original will. I sat frozen. If I'd received this letter in time, I would have known a large sum was coming in. But it had been withheld. And now the account was empty. "Chloe," I said, showing her the letter, "I'm sure Mom hid this from me." She frowned. "That means the money's already been divided, without your signature." I decided not to wait. The next morning, I called the law office listed on the letter to confirm they had sent the notice to all 3 heirs. The person handling the file said, "According to our records, you signed a power of attorney authorizing Mrs. Linda Carter to collect the funds on your behalf." My blood ran cold. "I'm sorry, but I never signed anything. Here's a scanned copy of the signature." He paused. "And I have to say it looks quite a bit like yours." I felt the blood rush to my ears. If my mother had forged my signature, then this wasn't just a family dispute. This was a criminal act. That very day, I found a lawyer specializing in property disputes and inheritance fraud, Mr. Harris, a man in his 50s with a calm but sharp demeanor. After I explained the situation, he leaned forward. Madison, the first step is to gather all relevant documents. Your father's original will, the property deed, bank transactions, and especially that power of attorney. If what you're saying is true, this is a case of signature forgery and asset misappropriation. But I hesitated. My mother is the one who did this. I don't want to turn this into a legal war. Mr. Harris looked me straight in the eye. You're not starting a war. You're protecting what's yours. I stayed silent. My rational mind knew he was right, but my heart still ached at the thought of facing my mother in court. A week later, Harris showed me a copy of the so-called power of attorney my mother had submitted. The signature did look like mine, but the strokes were shaky and slightly off, just enough for a handwriting expert to confirm it was forged. Beneath my signature were Ethan and Mark's signatures, attesting that I had signed it in front of them. I exhaled sharply. So they made this up together. But something else caught Harris's attention. The date on the document was 2 weeks before I agreed to go to Seattle. That meant they had planned everything ahead of time, and my business trip had simply been the perfect opportunity. I remembered that night. My mother had invited me to dinner, barely reacting when I talked about the project, yet asking in detail about my schedule, my flight time, and how long I'd be away. At the time, I thought it was concern. Now the truth was glaring under the harsh light of a courtroom. And I knew this was only part of the story. That evening, while I was organizing evidence, Chloe walked in. Madison, I know you want everything airtight before you make a move, but maybe now's the time to consider going public with part of it. What do you mean? Let them know you know. Make them nervous. I shook my head. Not yet. If they know, they'll erase whatever's left. Kept digging. Thanks to an old friend in real estate, I found out the buyer of the house wasn't an outsider. It was a company owned by Ethan's ex-wife, formed just last year, and the purchase price was 40% below market value. That opened up a new question. Was the sale only to pay off Ethan's debt, or was it also meant to cover something else? The more I uncovered, the more tangled this web of lies became. And I knew I had to follow it to the end, no matter how dark the path through my family's history would get. I used to believe silence was the way to keep peace, but now I realized that staying silent only made them push further. This time I would not stand still. After learning the buyer was Ethan's ex-wife's company, I had no doubt everything was premeditated. That realization both fueled my anger and pushed me to move faster. I began dedicating all my free time to gathering documents. By day, I showed up at the office on time, talking to clients as if nothing was wrong. By night, I sat at Chloe's dining table, poring over files, marking every detail that could be used as evidence. Meanwhile, the boutique hotel project in Seattle was entering its final stretch. I was invited to work directly with the chain's management team, earning praise in every meeting. The company's director even made me a formal offer. If the project was completed on schedule, I would be promoted to creative director for the new branch. One late evening, after sending in the final updated designs, I received a call from Harris. His voice carried urgency. Madison, we just found something important. Ethan is in serious financial trouble. He invested in a real estate project in Arizona and lost everything. The house sale happened exactly when he needed money the most. I stayed quiet for a few seconds before replying. So it's clear now. Selling the house was to save him. And possibly to hide the use of inheritance money for personal gain, Harris added. But we need more evidence to prove fraudulent intent. I remembered all the times Ethan looked at me like I was a burden. Turns out, I was just the last obstacle between him and the money he wanted. The next day, I took an hour off work to meet Harris. He placed a thick stack of documents in front of me, including the house sale contract, Ethan's ex-wife's company records, and bank transactions. Look here. He pointed to a large transfer. This is a consulting fee Ethan's ex-wife's company paid him right after the deal closed. It doesn't appear in his tax records. I sighed. They think they've erased the trail. Madison, this is the time to decide. We can file an official notice to freeze Ethan's assets until the case is resolved. He nodded. Do it. In the days that followed, I worked relentlessly to finish the Seattle project while tracking the legal proceedings. Focusing on work helped me stay calm. Each time I looked at the completed blueprints, I felt like at least one part of my life was still under control. Then one evening, as I was about to leave the office, the director called me in. He smiled. Madison, I just got feedback from the Seattle clients. They're extremely pleased. I want to officially offer you the creative director position for the new branch starting next quarter. Your salary will increase by 20%, and you'll get to choose your own team. I thanked him, feeling a mix of relief and pride. After so much pressure, I finally had some good news. But that joy lasted only one night. The next morning, I received an anonymous email sent to my work address, accusing me of leaking Seattle project information to a third party in exchange for a cut of the profits. Attached were screenshots of messages between me and someone named Blake, a project assistant. I knew immediately it was fabricated. Blake had been a former classmate who once confessed to me but was rejected. Recently, he'd been assigned to the Seattle team and often seemed resentful when I gave him tasks. I called Chloe right away. I think Blake took money from Ethan to set me up. Do you have proof? Chloe asked. Not yet, but I know Ethan is desperate enough to do it. All that day, I had to work with the company's legal department to prove my innocence. Thankfully, every single piece of project data was stored and closely monitored. They quickly confirmed there had been no information leak. Blake was summoned to give a statement, and after just one interrogation session, he admitted to taking a personal payment to create trouble for me. He wouldn't name who had paid him, but I didn't need to guess. That evening, I sat in Chloe's living room, staring at the pile of documents in front of me. By now, this was about far more than a house or an inheritance. This was an organized effort to push me out of everything, both my home and my career. I told Chloe, I'm not going to let them win. Not this time. I believe you. But Madison, she said, holding my hand, remember to pace yourself. This fight will be a long one. I knew she was right. But thinking about how they had calculated every step to remove me only made me more determined. I was going to protect what I had built, and I was going to drag every truth into the light, even if it meant going up against my entire family. If you've ever been in a situation where your own family tried to destroy both your career and your rightful claims, you know exactly how I felt in that moment. And I want you to know, sometimes silence is not protection. You have to stand up, speak out, and act to hold on to what's yours. I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. After Blake was suspended for admitting he'd been paid to fabricate accusations, I was even more certain that Ethan and my mother had carefully plotted to cut me off completely. But this time I was going to be the one taking the initiative. I set up a meeting with Harris at his law office on a Monday morning. Portland was shrouded in fog, but inside me, my goal was crystal clear. Harris opened his laptop and showed me a timeline he and his investigative team had put together. Everything was there. The date the house sale contract was signed, the date the forged power of attorney appeared, the moment the inheritance account was drained, and the date Blake received a transfer from a business account under Ethan's ex-wife's real estate company. We have enough evidence to file a lawsuit, Harris said, his voice calm but firm. And if necessary, I'll request the court to temporarily freeze Ethan's assets, including any shares in his ex-wife's company. I stared at the screen, feeling both relief and a bitter sting. Harris. You know, I always thought that no matter how biased or cold my mother was, she would never actually team up with my brothers to hurt me like this. He nodded slowly. That's the hardest part about family property disputes. It forces people to reveal sides of themselves they usually keep well hidden. I signed the legal authorization giving Harris full power of attorney. As my pen touched the paper, I felt as if I'd just stepped across a line I could never return from. That afternoon, I sent a message to Ethan and my mother. We need to meet. Tonight. Not at the house. Harris's office. If you don't show, I'll consider it as giving up your right to explain. I didn't wait for a reply, just set my phone aside. At exactly 7 p.m. they arrived. My mother walked in first, black coat, hair neatly pinned, face cold as ice. Ethan followed behind, not even glancing at me. Harris invited them to sit, then opened the thick case file. Mrs. Linda, Mr. Ethan, he began. Today I want to present evidence regarding the sale of the property at 1748 Oakwood, and the complete withdrawal of funds from Mr. Robert Carter's inheritance account. My mother cut him off. We have nothing to discuss with her lawyer. I looked straight at her. You'll want to hear this. Trust me. Harris started laying out each document. A scanned copy of the forged power of attorney, bank statement showing the transfer to Ethan's ex-wife's company, and proof of a so-called consulting fee deposited directly into Ethan's account right after the house was sold. Ethan leaned forward to look, then let out an awkward laugh. That was just personal debt repayment. It has nothing to do with Madison. Harris replied immediately. The issue isn't how you spent the money. The issue is how you and Mrs. Linda removed her from the transaction, despite her being a legal co-owner. That's against the law. My mother folded her arms, silent. Her eyes flicked to me once but didn't linger. Mom, I said slowly, you could have just talked to me. But you chose to forge my signature, trick me into going away, and do everything behind my back. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. Enough. You always act like the whole world is against you. There's no need to act, I replied, keeping my voice even. The evidence is right here. And the court will hear it all. The room's air grew heavy. Harris let the silence hang for a moment, then said, I'll be filing the lawsuit by the end of this week. However, if either of you wishes to negotiate to lessen the legal consequences, we can discuss it here. My mother stayed quiet. Ethan turned his face away, clearly not interested in listening. I understood. Negotiating now would only weaken my position. I gathered my papers and stood up. The choice is yours. But I'm not stepping back. On the way home, I got a message from Mark. He hadn't been at the meeting, but he must have heard from Mom or Ethan. The message was short. You know, I never agreed with what they did. I just stayed quiet because I didn't want to be cut off. If you need me, I'll tell the truth. I pulled over to the side of the road and read it again. Mark wasn't innocent, but at least he was willing to cooperate. The next day, I met Mark at a small coffee shop by the river. He looked worn out, with dark circles under his eyes. I didn't want it to go this far, he said. But it's true that Mom and Ethan planned this for a long time. They didn't just want to sell the house. They wanted to take the entire inheritance from Dad's investments. Mom said if you got your share, you'd waste it on some useless design work. I gave a faint smirk. And you believed that? Mark shook his head. No. But I didn't dare oppose them. Now I'm ready to testify if needed. That conversation didn't make me feel at ease, but at least it gave me another witness. And I knew this would be a crucial piece when everything went to court. That night, back at Chloe's apartment, I opened my laptop and began drafting my own timeline. Every conversation, every detail, every exact date and time. Each sentence I typed felt like another nail reinforcing my resolve. This time I wasn't just protecting my share, I was making sure they faced the consequences for everything they'd done. I'd lived long enough in silence and concession. Now it was time to speak, and to let the truth speak with me. If you've ever had to stand up against your own family to reclaim your legal rights, share your story, because only when we speak out do we truly start to reclaim our power. After meeting with Mark, I felt I had gained a key piece of the puzzle. But at the same time, a part of me stayed on guard. I knew my family, when cornered, they would find any way to strike back, often in ways no one could predict. Honestly, I hadn't even finished organizing all the files when Harris called. His voice urgent. "Madison, you need to come to the office right now. I just got some information you have to know immediately." When I walked in, he was already seated, a thin folder in front of him that somehow radiated trouble. He opened it and slid it toward me. "This is a copy of your company's internal file, sent by a reliable source." I looked down. On the very first page was the title, Contract Breach Report, Employee Madison Carter. The contents listed a series of accusations claiming I had deliberately leaked project information to a competitor, and that this conduct could result in immediate termination. I looked up. "This is about Blake, isn't it? I thought the company had cleared me." Harris nodded. "Exactly. The problem is, this file isn't stored in the official system. It was drafted separately by an unknown author, but sent to several major partners of the company." My stomach sank. I knew the goal instantly. If they couldn't take me down legally, they would destroy my reputation, cutting off my only source of income, and my financial ability to keep pursuing the lawsuit. "Who's behind this?" I asked, though deep down I already suspected. The source said, "Ethan met with someone in your company. This person's name wasn't revealed, but they received a personal investment from Ethan right after this file was circulated." I leaned back, taking a deep breath. This time they weren't just going after my assets, they were targeting my career, the place I had spent over a decade building. "Madison," Harris said, "we can sue for defamation and damage to reputation, but first you need to secure your current position. I suggest you meet directly with the company's leadership and lay everything out." That afternoon, I walked into the 10th floor conference room where the CEO and 2 department heads were already waiting. I placed the folder Harris had prepared on the table and explained the situation. About Blake, the evidence proving the accusations were false. I didn't hesitate to mention Ethan's name, even knowing it could make things awkward. The CEO looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "Madison, we believe you. The Seattle project is proof enough. But you have to understand, accusations like this, if they spread, could seriously harm the company." "I understand," I replied, "and I'll do whatever it takes to stop the spread of this false information." Leaving that meeting, I felt a bit lighter, but I also knew I had officially gone public with the fight. There was no turning back. That evening, while I was at Chloe's small kitchen table, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered and heard a low male voice. "Madison, I think you'll want to know this. Ethan is preparing to transfer all the money from those consulting fees into an overseas account. If you want to keep anything, you need to act now." "Who are you?" "Yes. Just consider me someone who can't stomach the way he operates anymore." Then he hung up. I sat still for a few minutes, trying to connect the dots. If the money left the US, recovering it would be nearly impossible. I immediately called Harris to tell him. He said only one thing: "We need to get a freeze order right now." The next morning, Harris and I stood before the county courthouse filing for an emergency injunction. The judge agreed to review it that same day, a rare opportunity one couldn't afford to lose. But before the process was complete, I got a text from a trusted coworker. "Madison, be careful. Someone says you're under internal investigation. They want to suspend you to clarify the allegations." I gripped my phone tighter. It was clear Ethan was playing his final card, pushing me out of my income source while moving the money out of reach. I looked up at Harris. "They think I'll give up. They're wrong." He smiled faintly. "Then let's show them what happens when you corner someone." If you've ever had someone deliberately try to destroy both your reputation and your career to protect their own interests, you know exactly how I felt in that moment. And I believe there are times when only being pushed to the limit forces you to find the strength to fight back. The court granted the freeze order on Ethan's account just hours before the overseas transfer was set to go through. Harris called me as soon as he left the courtroom. "Madison, we've locked down the funds. But I have to warn you, Ethan won't take this lying down." I knew that already. Within hours, my personal email was flooded with anonymous messages, smears accusing me of being a family traitor, greedy, and ungrateful. Several social media accounts posted fabricated stories about me, clearly crafted to make strangers see me as the villain. I realized Ethan and my mother were now aiming for my mental state, hoping exhaustion would make me quit. But instead of breaking me, it only fueled my determination. I met with Harris to plan the next move. "What do we have now?" I asked, opening my laptop to pull up the list of files. "We have forged signature evidence, the house sale paperwork showing an unusually low price to Ethan's ex-wife's company, proof of illegal money transfers, Mark's testimony, and now the freeze order." He looked at me. "Legally, we're in a strong position. But I know you want more than that." "Yes, I want the truth out in the open. Not just so I can reclaim what's mine, but so everyone knows what they've done." Harris nodded. "When the lawsuit is filed, the documents will become public record. Are you ready for that? I've lost too much to still be afraid." On the day we filed, Portland's sky was gray and heavy. I stood before the courthouse, looking up at the imposing stone building, feeling both nervous and relieved. The case file was over 200 pages long, detailing every act of fraud, listing witnesses, and demanding damages. News of the lawsuit spread faster than I expected. A local reporter reached out for an interview, but I declined. I wasn't ready to turn this into tabloid fodder. Not yet. 3 days later, Ethan called. It was the first time he had initiated contact since everything began. His voice was sharp from the start. "You think you've won. You're tearing this family apart." I took a deep breath. "No, Ethan. I'm protecting myself from this family tearing me apart." He gave a mocking laugh. "You'll regret this." I didn't answer, just hung up. A week later, I received a summons to attend a preliminary mediation. Everyone was there. My mother, Ethan, Mark, me, Harris, and their attorney. The conference room was closed off, the door shut, and the pale white light made everything feel cold. Their lawyer opened with an offer. "My clients are willing to pay Ms. Madison an amount equal to 50% of the home's value in cash, in exchange for her dropping the lawsuit and signing a non-disclosure agreement." I looked at Harris, then straight at my mother. "Do you really think I'd stay silent so you can keep doing this to other people?" Her brow furrowed. "Madison, you're turning a private family matter into a public joke." "No, Mother. You and Ethan turned it into a joke a long time ago." Ethan tapped his fingers on the table. "Fine. If you want to fight this to the end, I won't hold back." Harris leaned toward me and whispered, "Refuse. We can demand more without being bound to silence." I said clearly, "I refuse. We're going to court." The mediation ended in tension. As we left, Mark slowed his pace beside me. "I know you want everything out in the open. But be prepared. They'll dig into your past to smear you." "I know," I replied. "But the truth will be stronger than any lies." The official trial date was set. In the meantime, Harris and I prepared thoroughly. He arranged for me to meet with a psychologist who would testify about the emotional impact of being stripped of ownership and publicly defamed by my own family. We also hired an independent handwriting expert, who confirmed 100% that the signature on the power of attorney was forged. As the court date drew near, I realized I no longer felt the fear I once did. Instead, there was an odd calmness. I had seen the true faces of the people who were once my family, and now I was ready for everyone else to see them too. If you've ever had to confront betrayal from your own blood, you understand. Some battles aren't just about winning. They're about never having to bow to what's wrong again. And I believe that when you hold the truth in your hands, you already have the greatest advantage. Remember that. The day of the trial finally arrived. That morning, the Portland sky was as gray as it always was during endless rain, but inside me, there was a strange stillness. I had gone through the rage, the hurt, and now all that remained was an unshakable resolve. I slipped on a navy wool coat, tied my hair neatly, and walked into the courtroom with Harris. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected. The spectator benches were full, and I spotted a few local reporters taking notes. Across the aisle, Ethan and my mother sat beside their lawyer, their expressions cold as they whispered to each other. Mark was there too, sitting in the back row, his eyes quietly fixed on me. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and the trial began. The defense lawyer tried to paint me as someone destroying family ties over money, claiming my accusations were based on misunderstandings and personal emotions. But Harris had prepared every detail. When it was our turn, he presented the handwriting analysis, along with the expert's sworn statement that the power of attorney to sell the house was a forgery. Then he called Mark to the stand. Mark's voice was calm but firm. I saw Ethan sign Madison's name on the documents while she wasn't there. I objected and told our mother, but she told me to stay quiet. The courtroom went dead silent. My mother lowered her head, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Ethan tried to smirk, but his eyes betrayed his unease. Next, Harris called the psychologist to testify. She spoke about the deep emotional toll of having property stolen, being publicly shamed by one's own family, and how such acts could cause long-term trauma. I sat quietly, listening as if hearing my own story told by someone else, about a person who had endured far too much yet still stood tall. When my turn came, Harris placed a hand on my shoulder, signaling me to stay steady. I stepped forward and took a deep breath. Your Honor, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to protect my legal rights and to say that no one, not even family, has the right to take what's mine through deceit and coercion. My voice didn't waver. Each word felt like a needle piercing through the heavy fog that had hung over me for years. I recounted every step, from discovering the forged documents to being turned on by my family, to deciding to file the lawsuit. I didn't embellish, didn't dramatize, just let the truth stand on its own. The arguments went on until late afternoon. When the judge returned after recess, my heartbeat slowed, as if I were waiting for a door to either slam shut or swing open. His voice was firm. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court finds the power of attorney to be a forgery, rendering the property transfer null and void. Ownership is restored to the plaintiff, Ms. Madison. Additionally, the defendants must cover legal fees and pay damages for emotional distress as provided by law. I closed my eyes for a second, not to hold back tears, but to fully absorb the moment. Murmurs rose in the gallery. A few people nodded toward me. Harris gripped my hand. We did it. Ethan and my mother quietly gathered their papers. No apology, no remorse. But I no longer needed it. They would have to live with the consequences of their own actions. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the stone steps and took a deep breath. The Portland rain still fell, but it no longer felt cold. Mark came out behind me. Madison, I know an apology can't change the past, but I want you to know I'm on your side. I gave a faint smile. Thank you. Just knowing the truth has been spoken is enough. Weeks later, I returned to the house they had tried to take from me. The walls were the same, the scent of aged wood still lingered, but the space felt different. It was mine, fully and forever. I began making small renovations, not to erase the memories, but to turn it into a place of new beginnings. In the living room, I framed and hung a copy of the court judgment, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that truth and resolve can prevail, even when your opponent shares your blood. One rainy afternoon, standing on the porch and watching the drops speckle the quiet street, I realized I no longer felt anger. Only peace, the kind I thought I'd never find again. If you've ever had to face betrayal, remember, silence sometimes only feeds the wrong. Standing up for the truth might cost you a lot, but it will give you the most important thing back: freedom in your own soul. I know everyone will have their own perspective on this story. Some will say I was too harsh with my family. Others will think I was right to protect my rights and dignity. But I believe anyone who has felt the sting of betrayal from someone they love will understand why I had to choose this path. To me, family isn't defined solely by blood, but by respect, honesty, and love. When those values are lost, all that remains is a shell, while the heart no longer has a place to call home. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were in my position, would you stay silent to keep the peace, or stand up like I did to reclaim justice? Share your feelings below. You never know, your story and perspective might give strength to someone in the same situation. And if you're interested in more real-life stories about family, betrayal, and finding yourself again, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I promise, there are many more family stories that will make you think and touch your heart.